Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about science education with my guest from the Headwaters Science Institute. With me is Dr. Megan Seifert. She is founder and executive director of the Headwaters Science Institute. And she has formerly been a researcher at the Desert Research Institute in Reno, Nevada. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to learn about all the incredible student-driven research that you are supporting with your camps and programs, both in the field and online at your institute. But you have to explain what the name means, because I assume you're where the headwaters, where the Truckee River starts in the Tahoe area.
Yes, you did pick up on that. We are at the headwaters, but the headwaters of the Yuba River, which actually the Truckee River heads east into the desert. The Yuba River, we're on the other side of the pass, heads west towards Sacramento.
How long are these rivers, and what kind of ecosystems are there that students are going to be learning more about?
We are at the headwaters of the South Yuba. That drains into the main Yuba and then into the Bear and the American. So it's the start of one of the main drainages in Northern California. Students are here around 7,000 feet. So we are way up in the mountains at the headwaters where the river really begins, and hopefully it's as pristine as possible. Although here we have ski resorts, people living.
But these rivers are threatened, like almost every river in the world. Overuse by having the water be utilized in the cities, whether or not it's Reno, Nevada, or the Tahoe visitors. How is this water used, and what kind of wildlife would we find there where there still is water?
Yes, so you're right. The drought, the snowpack has not been what it normally is. However, we still have water up here. So the snow melts, and right now the rivers are flowing. The Yuba really declines down to almost nothing in the summer. And here you'll find at this elevation still some of the most pollution-intolerant macroinvertebrates, little critters that live under the rocks in the river. So we do know that the water is fairly clean. We have, obviously, bears in the summertime, deer, lots of birds around. The headwaters of the South Yuba River start in one of the largest subalpine meadows, Van Norden Meadow, and that's at the base of Sugar Bowl Resort. But that meadow does a great job at filtering out anything that comes down. That was preserved by the Truckee Donner Land Trust probably like 6 or 7 years ago now. They purchased that, and now the Forest Service is maintaining that piece of property. But that is just above headwaters, about a half a mile up the channel, and that's where all of the kind of drainages of the bigger mountains come down, and the South Yuba really starts in that meadow. In the summer and even now, you'll see birds, even things like pelicans, migrate through. There's enough water that hangs out there at the beginning of the summer that they might stop. All kinds of flycatchers, warblers, meadowlarks, all the kind of summer birds are here. It's a great stopover site and flyway for birds in the fall and spring migrations.
How much development is there? We're talking about an area near Lake Tahoe, which is very famous and developed as a resort community, Reno, Nevada. You mentioned the Truckee Donner Land Trust, and I know that you have a camp program at their Weber Lake campground. So how many acres are preserved and protected for nature, and how much is threatened with development or is developed?
This area obviously has a lot of developed land around. The Land Trust does do a great job at preserving what they can, but as you've mentioned, this is a resort area. You have ski resorts, you have homes, the whole town of Truckee. The Land Trust to date has preserved 40,000 acres of open space since 1990, so that's space that they've purchased that otherwise wouldn't have been open space.
This area, though, is really part of a massive area of the Sierra Nevada mountains, which stretches for hundreds of miles north and south in California. And east of that is a very famous waterway, the Mono Lake and the Owens River. Of course, most of that water is going to the city of Los Angeles, 400 miles away. It's on the east side of the Sierra Mountains, but yet it has so many connections to the desert, to the higher elevations. You must have some incredible scientific research going on there with your students in your institute.
Yes, students come here with their schools or for one of our camps. As you mentioned, we do student-driven research, so they get to ask their own questions and develop their own projects out in these amazing areas. We do camps on both the east side and the west side of Donner Summit. We are right near the actual summit itself.
And that's where pioneers from the east came across in the 1800s to try and cross this massive mountain area that has peaks going up 14,000 feet high.
That is correct, yep. The Donner Pass is the area that we are at. The pioneers did cross up through Truckee and then over through Donner Pass, trying to get down to the west side to Sacramento, Sutter's Fort.
And of course, there were numerous indigenous tribes in this entire region. What are you sharing with your students about how the indigenous people utilized the land, interacted with the plant and animal life?
They were smart and did not live here year-round, up in Truckee and over Donner Pass. However, it was really important in the summertime. So the Washoe tribe from the east and the Maidu tribe from the west would meet in this area. Summit Valley is what we now call Van Norden Meadow, and in the Truckee area. And there's a lot of evidence around here, grinding holes, petroglyphs, things like that, to show that they were here and that they were trading. And so we talk a lot to the students about the ways that the land has been utilized by people over time. They obviously were not building permanent structures and having the impact on the land that we do today. Living in these very fragile, these high elevation ecosystems are pretty fragile. It is important to have areas that are preserved, and obviously their culture, unfortunately, has changed with people living here permanently. This isn't a place that they trade anymore or are here summering. It has unfortunately changed their tribes and in culture. However, they are still around, and we try to learn what we can from them. We have a program called Lunch with a Scientist, and we are working on pulling together a series of talks by indigenous people, especially ones that are working today in ecological sciences.
And your Lunch with a Scientist podcasts are available to anyone and have excellent information from so many incredible scientists. I really have enjoyed listening to some of those. I would like to know more about how you got into this mountainous area when you were doing your doctoral research in Central California on barn owls.
Yes, so I did spend 5 years studying barn owls through the Central Valley. I was looking at them in nest boxes. They're used for rodent control throughout the Central Valley. A lot of farmers are using them, and ranchers are using them instead of stronger pesticides.
How wonderful to use the wildlife to have a sustainable ecological pest management program that doesn't provide any toxics.
Exactly. There's over 10,000 nest boxes through just the Central Valley area, kind of from Sacramento to Merced. They're being heavily used and very effective, and they actually have to commit to not using any of those pesticides that could kill the barn owls if they're going to use them for management. Barn owls are very nest site limited,
Owls are beautiful animals to see, and when I look at pictures of them, I'm amazed at how they blend into the rocks and the trees. You can hardly find them, and they are so camouflaged.
Yes, they're amazing. And barn owls fly so silently. They hunt mainly with their ears, so their flight is very, very silent. Yeah, they're incredible to watch and to study. Anyway, I ended up, my husband actually is a teacher. He was living here in the Truckee area while I was in grad school, so that's sort of how I ended up back this way. I mean, I love the mountains. I love to cross-country ski. I love the wildlife that is up here, not very far from the University of Nevada, Reno. So I started there, and then I moved into science education.
You have some great programs at your institute for middle and high schoolers. What about adults? If I came up that way, what would I see and do at your institute?
We don't do as much with adults. We do try to do a couple hikes in the summer. We do some cleanup days. We also have volunteer programs where adults can get background checked and then volunteer at a student field program so that they can interact with the students and help them with their research projects. Students often are studying things like the human impact around how the railroad and these roads and the ski resorts might be affecting the water quality or the amount of water or the plants and wildlife, say, in Van Norden Meadow or in the forest.
You encourage people not only to go out, learn about what is in the wild, but also to take action. You have the McConkey Eco Challenge. You encourage people to plant native plants, to conserve water, to not waste. What kinds of efforts should we be involved with to preserve and protect our wildlife and make sure they don't become endangered and rare and extinct?
Yeah, so one of the great things about these programs and kids getting to ask their own questions is that they really get to learn about something firsthand. They're not being told about it, right? They get to ask the question, find some answers, see what's going on for themselves. And I think a lot of the best things that students learn are to change kind of one thing at a time, right? So they may see whether it's the effects of like garbage or pollution, or maybe it's that we need more land to be preserved, and so finding ways to donate to the land trust, whether it's time or money, use less water. So a lot of them become connected to something as a jumping off point. We let students lead.
You want students to ask questions. What do they generally get most curious about?
Human impacts. We are here at the top of the ecosystem compared to when we sometimes do projects at schools, maybe where there are more human impacts, and they are often sometimes surprised or disappointed when there aren't bigger effects when we're in one of these more pristine meadows.
You started your efforts in California, but yet you've expanded nationally. What about internationally? Are you communicating with other schools and students and classes in other parts of the world?
We have not picked up any schools internationally yet, although it would be great. We have picked up students as part of our research experience. We've had students from India, Indonesia, Taiwan.
If students are gathering data, are they providing this to scientists who are doing research so it can be utilized to preserve and protect the ecosystems and the wildlife?
Yeah, so our students that do longer projects sometimes publish that work. There's a number of journals that they've published, and then they work with a mentor. So sometimes the mentor is able to utilize that research, and by getting it published, that's a way that scientists can then utilize the information as needed as well.
What were you most surprised about by a student's unexpected question?
Ooh, one of the first surprises is early on, the king fire had come through, and students were very concerned about the ash that had fallen on the meadow. They asked questions about how much ash was in the meadow. Could it change the pH of the water or the soil? I was shocked at watching these students picking up these tiny pieces of ash for hours on end. This is something I could never have asked students to do. They would not have done it. They would have refused. But because they had this idea and this project was their own, they're then looking at me saying, are you being careful enough? Are you getting all the ash in your plot? And so I think that's the thing that surprises me most about students' projects is when they pick it themselves, what they're willing to do and the efforts that they're willing to put in, as opposed to if I ask them to do a project for science or for the environment.
What research has excited you the most?
I think overall the years of looking at Van Norden Meadow, that is a meadow that used to have a dam, and so it had a lake, and that dam got removed. It wasn't supposed to be there, and there were lots of environmental issues. There were a huge outcry up here of people who loved the little lake. They didn't want it to go away, but ultimately for the restoration of the meadow and water rights and lots of reasons that the dam had to be taken down. And in those first years, we had students who were looking at the differences in the soil that had been underneath the lake and through the meadow, and we just learned things that none of the scientists up here were studying.
You have some exciting programs. I wish they were available when I was studying as a child in the secondary school system. I want to thank you so very much for making these opportunities available, letting us know what people can become engaged in terms of science education. Thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the chance to talk about these.
I have been speaking with Dr. Megan Seifert, who is the founder and executive director of Headwaters Science Institute. We'll be back in a moment with more ecological issues.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
Jennifer Cotton is the Program and Outreach Manager with the Headwaters Science Institute. She has been a secondary science content specialist in Florida, is a marine science educator, and is also the Education Ambassador for OSearch. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Your organization was founded in Truckee, Tahoe area of California, and yet you're based in Florida. How does that work when you are promoting education, online learning, as well as in the field?
Well, it works out really great that the capacity to work remotely now, so that was one positive thing that came out of the pandemic, was people realized that you could reach out to find the perfect fit for your organization. I had reached out to Meg about a different position to help communicate our research and work that we do with students. And in our conversation with my background, it came up that this position might be better for me. So the beautiful thing about it is, while we do have quite a bit of on-site programming in the Truckee, Tahoe area, we have program managers out there that manage those programs. My benefit is that I am now promoting our programs out here in Florida, as well as recruiting scientists for our Lunch with a Scientist program, and I'm able to do outreach as far as working with teachers due to my background in education.
You're referring to Megan Seifert, who founded the organization.
Correct, yes.
You have focused on many different aspects of science: earth science, life science, weather, chemistry, biology. How does it differ when you are having students do student-based research?
Part of our program is to align them with a mentor that is working in the field of their choice of study. So my primary job is to go through the process of science as a whole and allow for the experts in the field to really help them drive that portion of the research experience.
You do try to have these programs fit in with the national science standards, NGSS. So you have a science and engineering practices program, a cross-cutting concepts program. What are those?
With NGSS, all science teachers are required to teach certain content in the field that they're teaching. So if they're doing environmental science, that's a very large and broad topic that you can work on. So what NGSS does is it narrows that down for teachers so that they know what to focus on at the level that the students are ready to learn it. Some of it's a little complex, so we wait until older years for those. So we build on that knowledge over the course of their education as teachers. The cross-cutting concepts and the SEPs, which are the engineering practices, those are part of NGSS. And what our programs do is it highlights those pieces of the national standards. Many teachers have the content down. They struggle with the engineering practices and those cross-cutting concepts.
How different is it when students are doing research on their own versus at a camp with the mentors?
So the great thing about our programs is the experience is fairly similar that they're going to get because of the way that we structure our programs. So on camp, it's going to be a little different simply because they're there for a full week in person. There's other parts to it, like going on nature hikes and those kind of collaborative events that they do get from going to our camps. But our virtual programs are just as effective when it comes to understanding the process of science.
Obviously, students can be engaged in your McConkey Eco Challenge wherever they are, and there are awards for what kind of activities they're engaged in, such as planting native plants, collecting data on waste, promoting alternative transportation. What have been some of the successful challenges that students have done?
We have had a school design picnic benches and some gardens so that their school can have those ecosystems and environments on their campus. We've had recycle projects that have gone on, and we're always looking for new students with great ideas in order to help apply and be successful in that program.
If students are encouraged to collect data, such as how much waste there is, say at their school, food waste that's thrown away, have you seen that data be used by the schools to try and make changes so there isn't so much waste?
I'm not aware of that, but that is a really great idea for us to use at the end of our research experience for students to get that scientific communication out there. So that's a really great idea.
Obviously, planting native plants is important whether or not it's at a school, at a business complex, or at one's own home. And I know here in Los Angeles, we encourage native plants to bring in the butterflies and the native pollinators. It's so critical because exotic plants are not so successful and not as good for the birds and the bees and the other creatures. Do you find that it's hard for students to find the native plants, or are there enough nurseries now where they can get the seedlings and do the plantings?
Here in my area in Florida, we do have a whole native plant society, so I do know that there's groups all around. We do have a really great video on our YouTube channel all about this, with how to identify native plants and how to plant them in all the different locations that are great for them, plus the benefits for the ecosystem.
Your programs focus on middle school and high school. I remember when I was a child, we rode our bicycles to school. By middle and high school, it wasn't considered, quote, cool, so we walked. Have you found a resurgence of students using bicycles?
I think that students are becoming much more aware of what their impact does to the environment, thanks to things like social media where the word's getting out. A few of our Lunch with the Scientists videos that we have also discuss human impacts involving climate change. So I think that students are now starting to understand a lot more what their impact can do, and also the impact that they can have as an individual to inspire others to do things like ride a bike. I know there's a lot of days like National Ride Your Bike to School Day. So I do think that the movement is growing and that students are a lot more aware and made it a lot cooler.
You mentioned the Lunch with a Scientist, and these are podcasts that both children, young people, and adults can all listen into.
We have over 65 Lunch with the Scientist in our video library that's available on our website.
You have had numerous scientists working with sharks. That's a species of animal that has gotten a lot of bad media attention, and yet shark attacks are pretty rare, and we need sharks in the ecosystem. Are you able to get across to the students how important it is to have top predators survive for the total ecosystem to be sustainable?
Absolutely. Sharks is my passion when it comes to science. So educating students is another part of that, but sharks is my main focus of study. But the great thing about the talks that we have is they all focus on the positive aspects of sharks and why they are so important. We do have student activities that go along with each of our Lunch with a Scientist videos, and in those packets, it further expresses the need for sharks and how important that they are. And students will collect data and do their own investigation on that.
Do you think that there has been or will be a culture shift among people, particularly in Asia? I know when I was in China, they wanted to serve me shark fin soup, and I said, no, I want to save the sharks, and that's not healthy to get the fins off the sharks. Do you think that there is going to be a shift where that kind of product is no longer allowed or available?
The conversation has definitely progressed to a more positive outcome. It's still occurring, so it's not a solved problem, but the awareness has been put out there quite a bit. Here in the United States, both coasts, so our West Coast and the Pacific, and then here on the East Coast and the Atlantic, we have seen a massive increase in shark population, as well as a lot of the other fish that the sharks prey on, because as an apex predator, they're going to manage all that. So we are starting to see things slowly recover. So I'm very hopeful for the future as far as getting that awareness out and stopping these practices.
You also serve as an education ambassador for OCEARCH, which is spelled OCEARCH, dealing with ocean research. We know the oceans are threatened. There's so much research that needs to be done. What are some of the priorities?
So OCEARCH primary study are great white sharks. We're doing research in the Northwest Atlantic, so all along the East Coast, to get a large enough sample size of different life cycles of the great white shark. So we have young of the year, which are under a year old, all the way up to mature reproductive age males and female sharks. A lot of that research deals with looking at other aspects of the shark. So it's not just where they're going, they're looking at the ocean as a whole. So it's getting a nice health assessment as far as the ocean because of things like muscle plug samples. We can look at heavy metals that are within that muscle plug to determine the area of the shark and what kind of heavy metals are in the water. We're doing blood research where we can look at microplastics. We're doing research on reproductive health to see where they're giving birth, where they might be mating. And that's all beneficial because we can protect those areas and also understand the ocean health as a whole all along the East Coast of the United States.
Obviously, as a marine science educator and a secondary science content specialist, you have enjoyed doing the research on the marine areas. You have enjoyed providing science curriculum that's exciting for young people. What are some of the research projects that the students have recently engaged in?
Recently, we've had a student looking at hurricanes and the impact that heat has on them, so land heat. So he was looking basically into climate change over the years and the intensity and frequency of hurricanes that have hit Florida. We had the one that did the spider monkeys. We had a girl looking at water quality impacts from the mining industry in California. And we've had quite a few do human behavior projects looking at social media and the impact that it has on young people's mental health.
Are the students developing collaborations with students in other parts of the world?
Some of the behavior projects, they're able to put out their surveys to people all around the world. We do have a school that we just did a program with that we may adopt some of their information. So we have a school in the Orlando, Florida area that just completed a research project using algae, and they're going to be working with schools in different parts of the world. And we will be mentoring some of their students on how to potentially publish their work and what that looks like.
I want to thank you so very much for letting us know about some of the programs available and letting us know that we still have to care for all of our ecosystems.
I just wanted to thank you again for having me and for doing a radio show like this to put awareness out on all the different topics in environmental sciences. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you for being my guest. I have been speaking with Jennifer Cotton, Program and Outreach Manager with the Headwaters Science Institute. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.